אני הוילך בשמחו, לבייס הכנסס בשמחו, לבוידס בויריב בשמחו, יסבורך שמוי בשמחו, בשמחו, בשמחו.
The topic I'm going to deal with is exactly this particular tool that every one of us has, every one of us uses, every one of us in some way or another utilizes. And my question is going to be a very simple one. Can you hold it in your hand when you daven? That's the question. We hold it in our hands for many things, when we go to the store, when we go to work. And the question is it a problem to hold it in your hand for davening? So the beginning of this particular discussion starts way back when, in the Gemara, at the top of the source sheets, where the Gemara says, "Lo yochaz adam tefillin biyado v'sefer Torah bizra'o v'yitpalel." A person should not, when he davens, hold tefillin in his hand or a sefer Torah in his hand and daven. Now, we're not talking about psukei de zimra here. We're talking about the real McCoy of davening, which of course is the Amida. You shouldn't daven, says the Gemara, with tefillin and sefer Torah. It's not a good idea to sleep with the sefer Torah on you or with tefillin in your hands. That's a very good piece of advice when you go on planes with sefer Torah brought from America to Israel, or you don't have a place for your tefillin in your overhead, so you put it in your hand. You shouldn't sleep with them. Fine. Then the Gemara goes on. Amar Shmuel says Shmuel, Sakinu ma'ot ve'ke'ara, a knife, money, as well as a bowl. It's not just very holy things like tefillin and a sefer Torah, but even a knife, even a bowl. You shouldn't hold it in your hands during davening. Says Rashi, I'll tell you why. You know why you can't hold these things? It has nothing to do with it's holy, it's not holy. We're worried all davening that it's going to break. I mean, what do we do when we daven? We talked about this yesterday. We shuckle, right? So we're shuckling here. I hold this very hot coffee in my hand. I'm more worried about this hot coffee not making me burnt than I am about the words in the siddur. So says Rashi, that's not the way to have kavanah during davening. And therefore, it makes sense that it's not just with holy objects. It's even with a knife. You don't want the knife to fall into your foot. You don't want a bowl. I'm not talking about a cheap bowl. I'm talking about a nice vase that costs $100 to break. And therefore, you should daven with nothing in your hands. This is paskined in the Shulchan Aruch, Keshehu mitpalel, when a person davens, lo yochaz biyado, you shouldn't hold in your hand anything.
Even
why? We'll get to the siddur. Because all you're going to be worried about is not the davening and not the words of the siddur, but rather these things shouldn't fall. Veyitrad, and you'll get all fatumult. How do you say fatumult in English?
Mixed up.
Very worried. V'titpatel kavanato, you won't have kavana in davening. The Pri Megadim adds, even though the Gemara talked about Shmona Esrei, hu adin b'sha'at kriyat shma ufsukei de zimra. It's the same thing throughout davening. So when you come to shul or you're davening at home, don't hold things in your hand. That seems to be the implication of this Gemara. The question I have is, well, does that include everything? In other words, we have to daven handless? Or maybe, no, we can daven with things in our hands, but not specific things. The way I see it, without looking at the source sheet, there's going to be two options. Option number one is don't hold things in your hands that you're worried that if they fall, you're going to be upset. But if you hold things in your hand that if they fall, all right, but I'm not so upset, you can hold it in your hand. This macaroon, this Pesach, kosher for Pesach macaroon. If I'm holding this in my hand during davening and it falls, I don't know if I'd get so worried. After davening, I'll take a broom, a dustpan, and we'll look after it. But this kosher for Pesach plate, if I hold it in my hand and it breaks during davening, what happens? Boom! And it's all over the place, and people can get cut. So my question is, what's the extent of this halacha? Rabbeinu Yonah, which was one of the Sephardic Rishonim, says on the right side of the page, indeed, you should daven handless. The fact that the Gemara only talked about tefillin, sefer Torah, a bowl, a knife, and Money, lav dafka. Ela orcha de miltanaka. These are what people usually held in their hands, I guess, at the time of the Gemara. But hu adin she'en lo litol biyado shum davar b'sha'at tefillah. But quite frankly, you shouldn't hold anything in your hands during davening. Understood? Handless. You come to davening, handless. This smak, Sefer Mitzvot Katan, Rav Moshe Mikutzi, he had a very hard life. Have you heard about the famous disputation in France, where at the end of which they burned 24 wagon loads of Gemaras in 1242? So this smak was involved in it. Wasn't an easy time for Jews in the Middle Ages. And he says, B'sha'at tefillah, at the time of davening, lo yochaz shum davar biyado, shema yasiach ta'ato, don't hold anything in your hand. You should have everything on davening. So handless. And indeed, the Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Berurah in the name of the Taz basically brings these point of view. But on the left side of the page, Rabbeinu Yonah has to not go ahead and ignore one of the greatest Rishonim, and that, of course, is Rashi. When you learn Gemara, Rashi's printed it, as you know, on the page. So you can't learn a Gemara without Rashi. So even Rabbeinu Yonah couldn't ignore Rashi. So Rabbeinu Yonah says, Perush Rashi, Rashi says these things and only these things. Aval shar dvarim she'en bahem hefset im liplo miyado mutar litpalel bo'odan biyado. Says Rashi, the only things you can't hold in your hands are things that if they drop, you are going to get very upset. Or to be more precise, you are going to be worried the entire davening that they're going to drop. So, we gave an example, a knife. You're very worried a knife will drop because it will drop into your foot. You're very worried that this plate will fall, it will break into smithereens. But a macaroon, this macaroon is so hard, I'm not so sure you'll even need a broom to pick it up. So therefore, says Rashi, that's okay. The Pri Megadim says that according to Rashi, that's exactly what he means. Hani dafka, only these things. And the Lechem Mishneh, who's one of the interpretations on the Rambam, says exactly the same thing. The Da'at Rabbeinu, he says, the opinion of the Rambam, the Chomad Kelim shechas aleihem shelo yishabru hein dumya demaot. The only things you can't hold in your hands are things like money. Why is money unique? The Gemara mentioned money because if you have cash in your hands or coins in your hands and they start going all over the place, people are going to pick them up and run away. That's going to make you worry during davening. But other things, like a macaroon, you can hold in your hands. And indeed, the Magen Avram, the Mishnah Berurah bring these point of view. So my question is, what's behind this machlokas? Yes?
So Rabbeinu Yonah on the left is sort of qualifying himself, the Rabbeinu Yonah, the chair on the right side?
Rabbeinu Yonah brings two opinions. He brings the opinion of his Rebbe on the right side that says handless, and he brings the opinion of Rashi that says only things that you're very worried that if they fall, it's going to ruin your kavanah. But things like a macaroon, you can hold in your hands.
So he's just bringing two different opinions.
That's correct.
Rabbi, as a youngster, I was more afraid of holding a siddur in my hand than anything.
Why?
Because if it dropped, I had to pick it up and kiss it. And it was like almost embarrassing.
That makes that big noise, right? So, based on your story about the siddur, I believe we can come to some understanding as what's behind this difference of opinion. Is it handless, or is it only things you're worried about? So I can end the shir here and say very simply, if you want to be machmir, don't hold anything in your hands. But if you want to be mekel, then you have to decide if a cell phone is something that if it drops, you're going to get very worried. I hate to say this, but I don't believe anyone in this table has a cell phone that if it drops, anything happens. I know my cell phone, if I throw it on the floor, nothing happens to it. Because it has a cover and a cover on top of the cover.
Yeah, if you have a good case.
And even if you have and you buy it with a good case today, and you have a nice screen on it, that even if it cracks, the only thing that cracks is that plastic screen that costs 40 shekel to fix. So to say that, oh my gosh, if I hold a cell phone in my hand, I'm worried it's going to drop, I hate to say this, I'm not so sure. Most people today are worried that their cell phone will drop. On the other hand, I think many people would be worried that their iPad will drop because that doesn't have that cover on it and all that. So I can end the shir here and say this is basically the machlokas. Do you daven handless? Don't take chances. Or do you say to yourself, listen, my cell phone, if it drops, I can care less. It's like the macaroon. I can hold it in my hands. Rabbeinu Yonah brings Rashi. It's quoted by many poskim. Good enough. But I would like to suggest that there's something else happening here. That is not just a question of how much kavanah you will have or not have during davening. But rather, let's go to a totally different realm and talk about what should be your kavanah during davening. Where should your mind be during davening? So if you would have asked me before I became an adult, I would say davening is, as a former president of my shul in Halifax, Zichrono Livracha, already used to say, it's my half an hour a day where I close the world out. And I come to shul, and I close the world out, and I talk to God, and I focus on very important holy things, and then I go back to life. That's one way to look at davening. If you look on the right side of the page, you could see that there's many halachos that lead us towards that point of view. For example, how do we daven Shmoneh Esrei? Do we sit? No, we stand. Do we just stand, or we do something else by standing?
Feet together.
Feet together. Yechaven raglav ze etzel ze, kivan einam ela echad. It should look like one foot. Lihidamot lemelachim. So you should look like angels. Wow, that's lofty. Next bullet.
That's why you should have to put both feet together.
That's why you put both feet together, so you can look like an angel who basically has 2 feet together the whole time. That's lofty. Next, v'yeshomrim, and some say, kishaomed lehitpalel, yelech lefanav gimel psiyot, derech karov hagasha, ledaber shetzarich lasot. How do we start Shmoneh Esrei? We take 3 steps back, 3 steps forward. We're going into God's inner chamber. Very lofty. Tzarich sheyakov rosho ma'at. You don't stand in front of God with your chest out, like I'm the best over here. No one's like me. You got to kiss my ring. You be humble before God. And finally, meniach yado al libo b'kapotav, k'kshurin hayemanit al smalit, v'omed ke'eved lifnei rabo. You stand like a slave before his master, be'ema, be'yira, u'befachat, with awe, with reverence, even with fear before God. So there's one experience of davening that's very lofty. I would even say it's an experience of davening that's very much in the holy realm of holiness. That's one kavanah of davening. But there's another kavanah of davening. You know what that is? We spoke about yesterday in the davening shir, and I'm quoting it again. When I was in school in Israel, I came to Israel in 6th grade from America, and I didn't understand total Hebrew. I knew some Hebrew. And the teacher kept on telling kids that if they didn't behave, they would have to copy Perek Kuf Yud Tet, 119. He meant they would have to copy Perek 119 in the book of Psalms in Tehillim. That is the longest Perek in Tehillim. When you go to a cemetery, Lo Aleinu, it has the names, right? That was the bad punishment. I never thought at the time that I could have outsmarted the teacher, because one of the shortest chapters in the Code of Jewish Law is Kuf Yud Tet. And in that chapter, which we quoted yesterday, says the Shulchan Aruch that in the middle of your lofty davening, with your feet together, standing before God in his inner chamber, with the awe and the fear and everything else, this is what you should do. Im ratzah lo hosif bechol brachot mi'emtza'iyot mi'ein habracha, mosif. If you want to add in things that have to do with your life, add it in. Ketzad, taking us by the hand, he tells us, if someone's sick, add it into the bracha starting with Rifa'enu. You need money, add it into the bracha of Barech Aleinu. You're for judicial reform, you're against judicial reform, you put it into the bracha of Ashiva Shoftenu Kevarishona. You need wisdom to get through a meeting, or you need wisdom to get over the fight with your wife or husband, whatever it might be. Atachonein la'adam da'at. In other words, according to the same Shulchan Aruch who says it's lofty, it's holy, it's everything, he also says, my dear friends, it is also practical to bring life into shul. Not like my president said I shut up my life for half an hour. No, bring your life right into shul with you and put it into your davening. Don't leave it outside the door. And this is just not on the top. Look on the bottom. On the one hand, we go ahead and in every shul, tzarich liftoach Uftachim uchalonot keneged Yerushalayim kedei lehitpalel kenegdan. In every shul around the world, they're facing Israel. In Yerushalayim, that we're zocha to be in, where do we face? The Ira Atika, the Kotel, or the Harabayatim. At the Kotel, you face the Kodesh Kodashim. In other words, where should you face? You should face the holiest place in the world. So outside of Israel, the holiest place is Israel. In Israel, the holiest place is Yerushalayim. In Yerushalayim, the holiest place is the Kotel, or the old city part of the Kotel, the Harabayit area, etc. But on the other hand, says the Shulchan Aruch on the left side, V'tov shiyu b'beit knesset yud bet chalonot. There should be 12 windows. Does anyone know why he picked 12? Let's go back to Saturday night. Who knows 12? Shnei masar mi yodeya. Shvatim. Let me ask you all a question. If the Shulchan Aruch says the proper way to build a shul is with 12 windows, what is he basically telling us? That when you daven, where should be your focus? On the Jewish people's needs. Now, I hate to say this, but the Jewish people's needs are not always, how do we get holier? How do we get more lofty? How do we learn more Torah? How do we do more mitzvot? How do we do more chumras? No! The Jewish people's needs are also very, very tangibly practical. Namely, the Jewish people's needs are, they need money, they need unity, they fight with each other, even brothers and sisters fight with each other. In other words, in shul, on the one hand, we're facing the holiest place and we're being very holy, but on the other hand, we're being very practical. On the one hand, we're standing with our feet together like angels, but on the other hand, we're bringing in all our needs right into davening. So putting all this together, what is davening? Davening on the one hand is a very holy act, but on the other hand, it's a very practical act. So going back to our cell phone, I would like to suggest that indeed, it is 100% permissible to daven with a cell phone for two reasons. Number one, we're not worried if it falls today. If you get a good case, so it falls, you pick it up. It makes a noise, people will look, okay, not so good, but end of the day, you're not worried it's going to break. Your whole davening with the cell phone, you're not worried it's going to break.
And most people walk around with the cell phone half the day anyhow. They're so used to having it in the hand. It's like another part of you. You know, it's like.
So indeed, Mr. Shatsky says, with due respect, we walk around all day with it. We're going to walk around with it at davening. It's like our third hand, if you think about it. Yes. But I'm going to add, the cell phone is our window into what we should be davening for. Let's think about this. In the cell phone, there could be a siddur, like I have, a tefillon. Mm-hmm. In the tefillon, you can put in names of people that you're davening for, say, if they're sick, and it will pop up when you daven from it. In other words, on the one hand, davening is a very sanctified act, but on the other hand, it has to be very, very practical. On the one hand, we're like angels, but on the other hand, we have to bring life into shul. The cell phone is our window to life into shul.
Can I add one thing to the cell phone?
Yes.
I'm a big supporter.
We'll go into ramifications in a minute. Yeah.
Like I also have a siddur on my cell phone.
Yeah.
And it not only does that, but it highlights things that change. For example, today, Morita Tal is in red, so you don't forget to say it.
Right.
You know, it gives you all these timely.
So you're
reminders.
adding, Mr. Shatsky, that indeed the cell phone actually helps you daven because it has all the right davening on the right day. You don't have to start figuring out what time of the year I'm in. Yeah. It's right there.
It's right there.
So it helps you davening too.
It's so good.
We're going to get to that ramification right now when we turn the page, because we're going to get to an exception to the rule. Okay, we talked about the bowl, we talked about the Sefer Torah, the tefillin. Now we're going to talk about something on a different holiday, but it's an interesting question. Yeah.
There's another advantage, is the Otiyot Gedolot.
Yeah.
I can actually, a siddur that I can read from is heavy.
A sidur's heavy, and it usually has small print.
Yeah.
And a cell phone
even
is...
a big print siddur is heavier.
Yeah, a cell phone is bigger, and it has bigger print, and yes, that would help your davening.
About Shabbat. Okay.
Don't have a solution yet for Shabbat.
I don't know what the ramifications are, but as you know, even a rabbi standing up saying, turn off your cell phones, people don't do it.
Yeah.
Those same people are going to be the ones leaving the ringer on and their notifications. So that's a big thing.
So, it's a big thing. It's indeed, in my opinion, not a good idea because many people are going to ignore the rabbi. Maybe it's better sometimes not to say things that people won't follow. The Gemara says that just like there's a mitzvah to tell people to do the right thing, if you know they're going to do the wrong thing, you better shut up.
Yeah.
Because it's better they do it inadvertently than on purpose.
I've been during Tefillah, where it wasn't Shabbat or something, and the rabbi called someone out on it. And I don't think it's a nice thing to do.
No, I don't think it's a
Called
nice thing
them
to
out
do.
Because it
Anyway.
rang in the middle.
Okay, that's a problem. If you're going to use a cell phone, I'm going to say already now, you have to make sure it's on vibrate or on silence, because for a very simple reason, two reasons. Number one, it should be on silence so it doesn't bother you when you're davening. And number two, it shouldn't bother other people. So absolutely. And I really am dismayed, and I'm very upset when people have a cell phone go off during davening and it's on ringer and they take the call in the middle of shul.
Yeah.
I understand right away they shut it off, they forgot, okay. I get that everyone can forget things, we're all human. But then they take the call. Anyway, let's see an exception to the rule to see what I just said come to fore. So says the Gemara in Sukkah, so a different holiday, but also a Chol HaMoed. Amar le Mar, bar Amar le Rav Hashi. Said Bar Mamar Amar to Rav Hashi. Abba Tzluye, a guy named my father, Tzluye Kamatzlile. He would daven when he had his lulav and etrog in his hand. So during Sukkot, he would go to shul, let's say on Chol HaMoed, and he would daven Shmoneh Esrei with his lulav and esrog in his hand. So the Gemara right away says, wait a minute. We just learned at the beginning of Shir, you're not supposed to hold anything in your hand. Meitive, guys. Lo yochaz adam. You shouldn't have your knife in your hand. You shouldn't have your bowl in your hand. You shouldn't have a Sefer Torah in your hand. You shouldn't have tefillin in your hand. So how did this wonderful Jew hold his lulav and esrog in his hand while he's davening Shmoneh Esrei? Answers the Gemara. Lav mitzvaninu v'tarid behu. Actually, these are kind of things that he's not worried about. It's a mitzvah, and he's not worried about it. And then they bring a beautiful minhag that actually happened here in Yerushalayim, that people would go around the entire old city with their lulav and etrog all day. They went to the store with their lulav and etrog. They went to their Chol HaMoed attractions with their lulav and etrog. Because there may be a mitzvah to hold lulav and etrog and to shake it in Yerushalayim, biblically, all 7 days. So why not chap the mitzvah? So they would daven with it as well. Says Rashi, it's actually a mitzvah to actually walk around with it, at least in Yerushalayim. Because he loves this mitzvah, because he loves the mitzvah of lulav and etrog, he's not worried during davening. And indeed, if you have, let's say, a pitumless etrog, you're not worried if it falls. If it happens to fall, it falls. You pick it up. So quite frankly, you're not worried, not to mention it's a mitzvah. So there's two things at play here. It's a mitzvah, and you're not worried if it falls. And that's the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Lulav bizmano, during Sukkot, if you want to hold your lulav in your hand during davening, mutar le'echos biyado. Kevan sha'achiza biyado hi mitzvah, eino nitrad bishvilo. Because holding it in your hand is a mitzvah, then you're not worried that it's going to ruin your kavanah. All right? Here is my question. What does the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch eventually mean? It's a mitzvah, you're not worried about it. We can suggest two suggestions. Number one, we said davening is a very lofty act, a very holy act. Remember? So what could be more holier than holding a lulav and esrog in your hand on Sukkot? You'd feel even more holy during that. Imagining saying Ya'aleh v'yavo b'yom chag HaSukkot hazeh, and you're holding the lulav and etrog in your hand. Let's take an example from Pesach. You came to the Seder night, and you hold the matzah in your hand when you say b'yom chag HaMatzot hazeh. What could be more holier than that? That's the way the Ritva goes. Says the Ritva, mitoch shechavivuto shel mitzvah shenetalo latzeit bo lo tarid. At the end of the day, because it's a mitzvah, he's not worried. I didn't understand Rashi. Because he loves the mitzvah of lulav and etrog, he's going to be even more worried that it's going to fall. Say it's a etrog with a pitum. Answers the Ritva, yesh lefaresh, detirdat de lulav, kevan de mitzvah shatahi v'hi chaviva, because it's a mitzvah that day, and we love this mitzvah, even though it hurts your kavanah a little, It doesn't make you go in the wrong direction. ואין זה מתעכב בתפילה כדי למנוע חיבוב המצווה, כי אפשר חיבוב מצווה זה יתננו ויזכרנו לכוון ליבו בתפילתו יותר. Imagine saying today is Sukkot, but you don't have the lulav in your hand. That's one kavana. But imagine saying today is Sukkot and you have the lulav in your hand. Say you're davening in a sukkah with a lulav in your hand. That will make your davening even more enhanced. So if you're supposed to have a holy, lofty davening, on Sukkot it would be even better to have it in your hand. So we'll chapa chumrah. We're going to say after this ritva, everyone's going to daven mincha at 6:15 with matzah in their hands. It will make our whole davening more substantial. That's one way to look at it. But there's another way to look at it, and that is, what's the agenda of the day? Part of the agenda on Sukkot is to shake lulav, correct? So if you're going to hold your lulav in your hand during davening, what are you basically doing? You're bringing life into shul. You're bringing your agenda into your prayer. And that is, in essence, another aspect of davening. Davening is not just to feel lofty and holy, it's to bring life into davening. And life into davening means bring your agenda into davening. In my humble opinion, based on that precedent, there is nothing better than a cell phone to hold in your hand. Because on the one hand, it has a siddur in it, so it will make your davening nice, enhanced, and as pointed out by Mr. Shatsky, you won't make mistakes because Morid Hatal today will be in red, as will be Retain Bracha, as will be Ya'aleh V'Yavo. But on the other hand, it's the agenda right before davening. Look at the news. See, what should I be davening for? You know what? Forget the news. Israel will be okay without us. You know, in Israel, many people have these parliaments. There's parliaments at the Kotel, there's parliaments at... They say, if only Bibi Netanyahu came to my parliament, he'd solve all the world's problems. So, I don't know how to solve the world's problems. I'm a simple Jew. My problems. Let me look at my emails, my WhatsApps, my issues, and daven for them. What's the better way to do that than this cell phone? If you leave your cell phone outside of shul, you come into shul, it's a very meaningless davening, because you're davening for many things, but maybe it's not targeted to that person's needs. So the lulav could be taken in two ways. Either it just makes you holier, or no, it's the agenda of the day. Part of my agenda on Sukkot is to shake the lulav properly. So, I believe that not only should a cell phone is okay during davening, we're not worried it's going to fall today if you have a good case, but number two, as long as it's on vibrate or silent, quite frankly, it has the agenda that you should be davening for. And what is my proof for what I'm saying? Exactly what we started this year with, and that is, your name again? Rita. I'll just for the recording, people should know who said it. Okay, the Gemara says that you always have to say something in the name of the person that said it. You will bring redemption to the world. So on the holiday of redemption, I want to bring redemption. So Rita said, well, if you can't hold anything in your hand, you should be handless. What about a siddur? What about a siddur? A siddur also, if it falls, boom! Everyone's going to look at you, right? And be embarrassed. So let's talk about the siddur a minute. The Ritva says, and I quote his words, Kol shekain sfarim v'chayotze bahem chutz misiddur tfilot debahai vadai leika lemechash. You shouldn't hold books in your hand when you daven, but a siddur is okay, of course. Why is a siddur okay? Of course, explains Rabbeinu Yonah. Kevan shehem litzorech hatfilah, because you need it for davening. In other words, a siddur is not abstract. It is the agenda. I would even say the agenda to the second power of davening. Davening is about saying words, and the words are in the siddur. So there's no problem to hold the siddur in your hand. The question is, why? So if you look on the right side of the page, the Shulchan Aruch says you can hold a machzor tefilot biyado b'sha'a shemitpalel. You can hold a siddur in your hands. Ho'il v'tofes litzorech hatfilah atzma lo tarid. Because it helps your davening, it doesn't bother you. And what's its precedent? Dumya, the lulav. The lulav helped your davening? Of course it did. When you said Chag HaSukkot Hazeh, it helped you. It made you not forget Ya'aleh V'Yavo at the very basic need, right? So all the more so, the siddur is going to help you daven properly because it has all the words in there. It's a very good thing for davening. But then we get to the Trumat Hadeshin. Who is the Trumat Hadeshin? So we all know in the Beis HaMikdash there was a mitzvah called Trumat Hadeshin. which was a very interesting mitzvah. It was done every day. It's in last week's Parsha of Tzav. We just read it on Shabbos, in which they had to take a dustpan, go onto the Mizbeach, take a little of the ashes from the day before, and take it off. And that is as much of an avoda in the Beit HaMikdash as it is to bring sacrifices, which teaches us that cleaning the house is also part of our work before God. That's the real Trumat Hadeshin. Now there's a book called Trumat Hadeshin. Who wrote the book? Rav Yisrael Isserlin. Now he didn't write a responsum, even though it's called Shut Trumat Hadeshin. Responsum Trumat Hadeshin. He did a very interesting thing. No one was asking him good questions, I guess. So what did he do? He wrote his own questions. They asked me, allegedly, something about this, and this is my answer. That's the way he wrote his book. He wrote his book in a format of questions and answers, but they weren't real questions. No one asked him these questions. To me, make it very clear, these questions were too good to be asked at that time. People were not at that level. In any case, the Trumas Hadeshin deals with this question about holding a siddur in your hand. No one asked him. And he says that indeed, you can hold a siddur in your hand. There's no problem. At the end of the day, if it falls down, it doesn't break. So there's no problem. Nira, I'm on the third line. Deshari, it is permitted. Dekevan de'eino oto amachzor atfilah rak kedei litpalel b'diyuk v'lo yidalek shum ot. Eno mem sheli bo doeg alav. Because the siddur is there for you not to forget the words of davening, it's a great thing to hold in your hands, and you're not worried about it. Unlike, say, the tefillin, which doesn't help your davening. If you hold tefillin in your hand, it doesn't help your davening. Second to last line. Because you're holding it in your hand for the sake of davening. In order to daven properly, then not only is it not a heavy load in your hand, it doesn't even hurt your kavanah. Well, if that's true with a siddur, then I'm going to say all the more so with a cell phone. First of all, a cell phone is lighter than the siddur reader. Second of all, it has the proper words in it for that day. And thirdly, it also has news, emails, WhatsApp that you can look at and get your mindset on before you daven. So therefore, to sum up what I believe on this issue, I don't believe anyone should come into shul with a cell phone that on the one hand is on ringer and on the other hand is going to bother them. But if you come into shul with a vibrate or silenced cell phone and it has a siddur on it, it can only help your davening in three ways. Number one, even if it falls, you're not worried. Nothing happens to it today with a good case. Number two, it has the agenda you should be davening for, either in the siddur in the cell phone itself, plus the news that comes in beyond it. And number three, maybe right before davening, you'll get that message of someone's very sick. Please, can you daven for them? And you could put it right into Rifa'enu, or whatever it might be. You have to bring life into shul, just like davening should be a holy act. And therefore, I believe that davening with a cell phone is a very good idea if you are disciplined. But if you're not disciplined, and during Chazarat Hashatz you're going to look at your WhatsApps, I don't think it's a good thing to bring your cell phone in. But if you're disciplined, it's a great thing. I can tell you that the tefillon, which is the siddur I use, actually blocks out the whole phone when you use it. In other words, it's impossible to see a WhatsApp unless you close the siddur. So it's actually great for davening. It has the proper davening in there. If need be, before davening, I do look at my WhatsApps, my emails and whatnot to get my mind on it. But during the actual davening, I'm in the cell phone. I'm in the cell phone siddur. And that only helps your davening. I'm going to add that it's very light, so it won't fall like the siddur reader had in her hand when she was young. And I'm going to add something else, which is just a very nice thing, but sometimes you need to hold something in your hand that's easy because you're holding other things in your hand. Does anyone know what I mean? There's a very hard Jewish mitzvah we do on Sukkot. I know it's the wrong holiday. It's called Hoshanot. Why is Hoshanot so hard? You're holding a lulav, you're holding an esrog, and you're holding a siddur, and you got to go around the bima. Now I'm going to add to the hardship. According to the proper way to hold a lulav and esrog, a lulav should be in your right hand, and an esrog should be in your left hand. Well, my dear friends, if this is in my right hand, and this is in my left hand, where is my siddur? Okay, it's impossible, right? But if you have a little cell phone, it's not so hard to hold an esrog and a cell phone at the same time. Your hand's big enough. So I actually have a card that I use for Hoshanot. I find it easier than the cell phone. But one day I forgot it at home. And I had a siddur I have a machzer in my talis bag for Sukkot. I could not do Hoshanot properly because I couldn't hold the lulav in my right hand, the esrog in my left hand with the siddur. So most people are not machmer. They hold both on one hand and they hold the siddur like this. But if you want to do it properly, the cell phone might be a very good idea. Yes.
Well, I wanted to say that not every shul, every place has a table. So if you're sitting, you could manage, okay? But if you're standing, you're walking around, how do you hold? That was my whole point.
Yeah.
How do you hold your matzah in your hand?
Impossible. I'm going to add another
and
scenario.
Turn the page.
And turn the page. I'm going to add another scenario. You're on the plane and you find a place to daven that doesn't bother people. You're not in the aisle, whatever. But a siddur will fall. So, many people, when no one's, when the stewardesses aren't there, they go to the stewardess chair, what do you call that chair that comes down?
Jump seat. Yeah.
The jump seat, right, that faces the other way. I can promise you put a siddur on that seat, it falls. You put a cell phone on that seat, it doesn't. My cell phone, for example, I bought this on Amazon, I think it cost me $20, has this little feature. I daven in my seat in the plane, I can see the siddur right in front of me. My optician told me it's better for my eyes when it's like this versus like this. We're used to learning Torah like this. He says, no, you should learn on a shtender like this. So this is like a shtender. I just wanted to end this year by saying that on the actual issue of cell phone, after going through the primary sources, there are 3 opinions that you can well imagine. Against, sort of for, and absolutely for. So I just want to quote them. Rav Avram Lifshitz, who's still amongst the living, said, "Asidor elektroni hu chefet shakar, she'im yikrol ifsod said mamoni rav." Quite frankly, the cell phone's very expensive. If it falls, it's going to be very expensive to fix. I don't think that's a scenario today. Not to mention the fact that it takes you and disrupts your davening because you can see the WhatsApp, the text, and whatever. And he says not to use a cell phone during davening. Rav Ronei Neubert Zecher Tzadik Levracha, he died very young, one of the greatest Zohar rabbis we ever had. He wrote a long article on this, and he basically said in a very nice way, you shouldn't use a cell phone siddur because, quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's not the way to get close to God. People will get closer to their cell phone than to God because in a cell phone today, you can get to many more interesting things than Chazarat Hashatz. I would like to suggest like Rav Rosen, also Zichrono Levracha. Rav Rosen was the head of the Tzomet Institute. They made all those tricks and gadgets for Shabbos. He was a wonderful Jew. I worked for him for a few years. He says that at the end of the day, the cell phone's like the lulav. It is part of the agenda of your davening. And therefore, you should daven with it, but be disciplined. And that's basically the psak halacha I give everyone. If you can be disciplined, then I believe a cell phone is actually a great idea during the week to daven from. But if you're not disciplined, then don't daven with a cell phone. And I say this with the bottom of my heart. There are days where there's so much happening, maybe it's not a good idea to use your cell phone. Not because it's going to fall. That we're not worried about today. But more importantly, because it's going to distract you. But if you're disciplined, and it's a day where the cell phone's only going to enhance your davening, I think it might be a great idea. Yes?
Is it possible that if it falls, because you're davening with kavanah, if you're paying attention, and you're disciplined? I can't see being disciplined with a macaroon in your hand, but okay, because I would have eaten it. But is it possible that if you're really davening with kavanah and it falls, Hashem will not let it break? I'm serious about this.
That's
I'm
a very
dead
serious question. My answer is I can't talk for God. I don't know.
But is it
On the one hand,
possible
God
if you're
says,
doing
I
what
could see
you
it both
need to
ways.
do?
God says, hey, this person's doing what I asked him to do. I'm going to
Yeah.
help him out.
Why
On the
should
other
we?
hand, God could say, hey, careless. Why were you holding your cell phone in your hand and not
the
being
book is too
careful?
heavy.
It's the old story. It's the old story with the guy on the deserted island, and he says, God, please help me. And God sells him a helicopter and sends him a boat and sends him a plane. And he says, no, I want God to help me. And finally, he dies of hunger. And he says, why didn't you help me, God? And God said, what do you mean? I sent you a boat and I sent you a plane. Now, God sent us these covers for cell phones. And thank God they're very cheap. And they save our cell phones from breaking. Why didn't you go buy them? That's what God may say. You had one
Yeah,
last
just
comment,
regarding
Mr. Schatz.
turning pages, and it's a ticha or Hoshana Rabbah, you have a siddur, you also have to turn the page.
Yes, that's even
my
harder.
siddur on my phone has a self-scrolling thing. and you
Self-scrolling.
could-
Oh,
and you could even adjust the speed if you dive in slow, make it.
I didn't even mention the
slow-
self-scrolling.
slowly, yeah.
The self-scrolling
It's
is great. I just came from my workout. I actually part of my workout is to walk on the treadmill on an incline, and part is to run. So when I run, I can't read, but when I walk, I can actually read. So sometimes I read the parsha, but it's hard when you're walking on an incline to do it. So the self-scroll helps. You put it on the speed you like, and I can read the parsha on the cell phone. It's actually very good. I fulfill the mitzvah of shtayim mikra v'chad targum, and I'm exercising at the same time. 2
As you get
mitzvahs.
into better shape, you make it scroll faster.
And when you get to better shape, you scroll faster. All right, we're going to now daven mincha. Many of you with your cell phones.
Yes. Okay.
אלוהים חי